casks, but when the gale was over they returned to take in their men and water. Their provisions being nearly exhausted, they resolved to visit the Dutch at Cochin. After sailing 3 days, they arrived off Telesherry, and took a small vessel belonging to Governor Adams, and brought the master on board, very much intoxicated, who informed them of the expedition of Captain Macra. This intelligence raised their utmost indignation. "A villain," said they, "to whom we have given a ship and presents, to come against us. He ought to be hanged, and since we cannot show our resentment to him, let us hang the dogs his people, who wish him well, and would do the same if they were clear." "If it be in my power," said the quartermaster, "both masters and officers of ships shall be carried with us for the future, only to plague them. Now, England, we mark him for this." They proceeded to Calicut, and attempting to cut out a ship, were prevented by some guns placed upon the shore. One of Captain Macra's officers was under deck at this time, and was commanded both by the captain and the quartermaster to tend the braces on the booms, in hopes that a shot would take him before they got clear. He was about to have excused himself, but they threatened to shoot him, and when he expostulated and claimed their promise to put him on shore, he received an unmerciful beating from the quartermaster, Captain Taylor, to whom that duty belonged, being lame in his hands. The next day following, they met a Dutch galliot, laden with limestone, bound for Calicut, on board of which they put one Captain Fox, and some of the crew interceding for Macra's officer, Taylor and his party replied, "If we let this dog go, who has overheard our designs and resolutions, he will overset all our well-advised resolutions, and particularly the supply we are seeking for at the hands of the Dutch." When they arrived at Cochin, they sent a letter on shore by a fishing boat, entered the road, and anchored, each ship saluting the fort with 11 guns, and receiving the same number in return. This was the token of their welcome reception, and at night a large boat was sent, deeply laden with liquors and all kinds of provisions, and in it a servant of John Trumpet, one of their friends, to inform them that it would be necessary for them to run further south, where they would be supplied both with provisions and naval stores. They had scarcely anchored at the appointed place when several canoes with white and black inhabitants came on board, and continued without interruption to perform all the good offices in their power during their stay in that place. In particular, John Trumpet brought a large boat of arrack and 60 bales of sugar, as a present from the governor and his daughter, the former receiving in return a table clock, and the other a gold watch, the spoil of Captain Macra's vessel. When their provisions were all on board, Trumpet was rewarded with about 6,000 or 7,000 pounds, was saluted with 3 cheers and 11 guns, and several handsful of silver were thrown into the boat for the men to gather at pleasure. There being little wind that night, they remained at anchor, and in the morning were surprised with the return of Trumpet, bringing another boat equally well stored with provisions, with chests of piece goods and ready-made clothes, and along with him the fiscal of the place. At noon they espied a sail toward the south, and immediately gave chase, but she outsailed them, and sheltered under the fort of Cochin. Informed that they would not be molested in taking her from under the castle, they sailed towards her, but upon the fort firing 2 guns, they ran off, for fear of more serious altercation, and returning, anchored in their former station. They were too welcome visitants to be permitted to depart so long as John Trumpet could contrive to detain them. With this view he informed them that in a few days a rich vessel, commanded by the governor of Bombay's brother, was to pass that way. That government is certainly in a wretched state which is under the necessity of trading with pirates in order to enrich itself, nor will such a government hesitate by what means an injury can be repaired, or a fortune gained. Neither can language describe the low and base principles of a government which could employ such a miscreant as John Trumpet in its service. He was a tool in the hands of the government of Cochin, and, as the dog said in the fable, "What is done by the master's orders is the master's action," or, as the same sentiment is, perhaps, better expressed in the legal axiom, "Qui facit per alium facit per se." While under the direction of Trumpet, some proposed to proceed directly to Madagascar, but others were disposed to wait until they should be provided with a store ship. The majority being of the latter opinion, they steered to the south, and seeing a ship on shore were desirous to get near her, but the wind preventing, they separated, the one sailing northward and the other southward, in hopes of securing her when she should come out, whatever direction she might take. They were now, however, almost entrapped in the snare laid for them. In the morning, to their astonishment and consternation, instead of being called to give chase, 5 large ships were near, which made a signal for the pirates to bear down. The pirates were in the greatest dread lest it should be Captain Macra, of whose activity and courage they had formerly sufficient proof. The pirate ships, however, joined and fled with all speed from the fleet. In 3 hours' chase, none of the fleet gained upon them, except one grab. The remainder of the day was calm, and, to their great consolation, the next day this dreaded fleet was entirely out of sight. Their alarm being over, they resolved to spend the Christmas in feasting and mirth, in order to drown care and to banish thought. Nor did one day suffice, but they continued their reveling for several days, and made so free with their fresh provisions, that in their next cruise they were put upon short allowance, and it was entirely owing to the sugar and other provisions that were in the leaky ship that they were preserved from absolute starvation. In this condition they reached the island of Mauritius, refitted the Victory, and left that place with the following inscription written upon one of the walls: "Left this place on the 5th of April, to go to Madagascar for Limos." This they did lest any visit should be paid to the place during their absence. They, however, did not sail directly from Madagascar, but the island of Mascarius, where they fortunately fell in with a Portuguese of 70 guns, lying at anchor. The greater part of her guns had been thrown overboard, her masts lost, and the whole vessel disabled by a storm. She therefore became an easy prey to the pirates. Conde de Ericeira, viceroy of Goa, who went upon the fruitless expedition against Angria the Indian, and several passengers, were on board. Besides other valuable articles and specie, they found in her diamonds to the amount of $4 millions. Supposing that the ship was an Englishman, the viceroy came on board next morning, was made prisoner, and obliged to pay $2,000 as a ransom for himself and the other prisoners. After this he was sent ashore, with an express engagement to leave a ship to convey him and his companions to another port. Meanwhile, the pirates received intelligence that a vessel was to the leeward of the island, which they pursued and captured. But instead of performing their promise to the viceroy, which they could easily have done, they sent the Ostender along with some of their men to Madagascar, to inform their friends of their success, with instructions to prepare masts for the prize, and they soon followed, carrying 2,000 negroes in the Portuguese vessel. Madagascar is an island larger than Great Britain, situated upon the eastern coast of Africa, abounding with all sorts of provisions, such as oxen, goats, sheep, poultry, fish, citrons, oranges, tamarinds, dates, cocoa nuts, bananas, wax, honey, rice, cotton, indigo, and all other fruits common in that quarter of the globe, ebony of which lances are made, gums of several kinds, and many other valuable productions. Here, in St. Augustine's Bay, the ships sometimes stop to take in water, when they make the inner passage to India and do not intend to stop at Joanna. The pirates now divided their plunder, receiving 42 diamonds per man, or in smaller proportion according to their magnitude. A foolish, jocular fellow, who had received a large diamond of the value of 42, was highly displeased, and so went and broke it in pieces, exclaiming that he had many more shares than either of them. Some, contented with their treasure, and unwilling to run the risk of losing what they possessed, and perhaps their lives also, resolved to remain with their friends at Madagascar, under the stipulation that the longest livers should enjoy all the booty. The number of adventurers now being lessened, they burned the viceroy, cleaned the Cassandra, and the remainder went on board her under the command of Taylor, whom we must leave for a little while, in order to give an account of the squadron which arrived in India in 1721. When the Commodore arrived at the Cape, he received a letter that had been written by the governor of Pondicherry to the governor of Madras, informing him that the pirates were strong in the Indian seas, that they had 11 sail and 1,500 men, but adding that many of them retired about that time to Brazil and Guinea, while others fortified themselves at Madagascar, Mauritius, Joanna, and Mahilla, and that a crew under the command of Condon, in a ship called the Dragon, had captured a vessel with 13 lakhs of rupees on board, and, having divided their plunder, had taken up their residence with their friends at Madagascar. Upon receiving this intelligence, Commodore Matthews sailed for these islands as the most probable place of success. He endeavored to prevail on England at St. Mary's to communicate to him what information he could give respecting the pirates, but England declined, thinking that this would be almost to surrender at discretion. He then took up the guns of the Jubilee sloop that were on board, and the men of war made several cruises in search of the pirates, but to no purpose. The squadron was then sent down to Bombay, was saluted by the fort, and after these exploits returned home. The pirate Captain Taylor, in the Cassandra, now fitted up the Portuguese man of war, and resolved upon another voyage to the Indies, but, informed that 4 men of war had been sent after the pirates in that quarter, he changed his determination and sailed for Africa. Arrived there, they put in a place near the Spirito Sancto, on the coast of Monomotapa. As there was no correspondence by land, nor any trade carried on by sea to this place, they thought that it would afford a safe retreat. To their astonishment, however, when they approached the shore, it being in the dusk of the evening, they were accosted by several shot. They immediately anchored, and in the morning saw that the shot had come from a small fort of 6 guns, which they attacked and destroyed. This small fort was erected by the Dutch East India Company